Good afternoon, friends. David Wright here, and I'm your host of the Disruptive Innovators, Champions of Digital Business podcast, looking red as ever. And I am lucky enough this afternoon to be joined by Darlene Reina. Darlene, it's a pleasure to have you on.
Awesome. Thank you. Lovely to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Darlene, for those of our listeners who might not be familiar, can you just tell everybody a little bit about your current role?
For sure. So my name is Darlene, and I am currently head of IT and business systems at Calendly. So think anything on the internal side of IT, of technology, that all sits within me. Anything that can be support to the business, that is what I'm here for.
Amazing. Yeah, really excited to learn more about what you guys are up to. I'm sure everybody who's listening to this has seen or used Calendly. Yeah, of course, yeah, and it's exciting to have you on. I'm interested to hear too about like the kind of COVID era, how that might have impacted the business. I know you're newer to Calendly, but yeah, anyway, we'll dive into that in a little bit. We like to start the episode, as our listeners typically know, like with just one piece of actionable advice you might look to leave people with today.
For sure, for sure. It's funny, this is a piece of advice that my boss recently shared, but it stuck with me because it really speaks to how I've grown. It's do the things your boss hates. And that's how I've always operated. That I do the things that my boss doesn't like to do. And I just say, it is me. I will do that.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that, because I try to hire people to do the things that I don't like to do, and to round out the skill set. My mother, who's the president and CEO of a nonprofit, always used to tell me to hire people that are smarter than you, right? And so that's what I strive to do as often as I can. But I digress. Darlene, really excited to have you on. I'm interested to learn more about your story as an executive. I know you're at Zendesk, but starting as far back as you want to go to describe your kind of journey to get where you are today, how did you start out and how did you find yourself here?
For sure. I started out technically like in college. You could say I started out when I was in college. My work study job was at help desk. Like I did I think it was like 10, 20 hours a week. That was help desk. That would have been my first foray into things IT. But I think my career really started probably like when I was at Apple. And I worked at that point. I was on the retail side and all the tech stuff at that point it was called like Family Room. But it was like whenever you would go to the Apple store to get something fixed, it would usually be me on the other side. But then when I was in school, found myself working shortly thereafter in higher ed, in IT and higher ed. And that was at Greenfield Community College. And that's when I was like, okay, this might actually be my career kind of energy. It was no longer meandering. I was like, I think I like this well enough to focus on it. And when I was at GCC, it was the pandemic soon after. All shifted to remote. And I remember there was like talks about going back in person. I was like, I don't know if I'm ready for that, even though the state of Massachusetts might be ready for that. And I found myself at Zendesk shortly thereafter. And I started there as their manager specifically focused on IT asset management. Thereafter, grew to a senior manager with increased scope. And then from there, my next journey took me to Calendly, which is where I am now.
Super cool. Super cool. So I'd be interested in knowing, along the course of your journey, what was one of the most important things you learned, and if you can think back to what life was like before and after learning it. Interested to hear from your experience.
Yeah, I think I learned that the art of storytelling is as important as knowing a tech stack through and through. Like that's something that like once it clicked for me, I found myself a lot easing into conversations, a lot having folks understand my messaging a lot better. And really just, I think I've said this before in terms of, I find myself more so now, especially as my scope has increased, more as a salesman than an IT leader, in the sense that I'm just selling people on ideas. I'm selling people on why we're doing a thing, why we're doing a thing now. I'm less focused on how we're doing a thing or what we're doing to accomplish it. That's more so my team than me. But I think the art of storytelling, being able to get your message across to any audience, whether it's an exec or an IC, that has, once I got that, I was like, okay, we can do this kind of energy, because it's just so super important. Especially people tend to get overwhelmed with vernacular within IT and let's say even security. And when you're trying to tell someone in the line of business why we're doing a thing, saying, I don't know, remediation or compliance, maybe it doesn't sting as well as, you know what, we're doing this to make sure that Calendly is safe and secure. Like that messaging becomes different. We're doing this to keep Calendly as an entity safe and secure. That sells a lot better than we're doing this to remediate a security vulnerability, or we got this message. Messaging is really important.
It's great advice, and I actually had a similar experience where I had a client give me feedback. It was an engagement that I got screwed on, and they kindly gave me some feedback separate and apart from the reason I was screwed. And it was a CIO that was a curmudgeon, but he gave me some of the best feedback that I ever got, which was I didn't meet them where they were at. And in retrospect, I think some of it had to do with that, exactly what you're describing, storytelling. And since then, my old business coach would tell me, make it simple enough that a 5-year-old would understand it. I think that there's putting myself in the other person's shoes. What do they want to hear to understand what I'm trying to? Because I could have the most beautiful diagram in the world, and it doesn't really matter if I don't translate it
Yep,
appropriately.
1,000%.
Is there is there a time that like you had a moment in your career that you either failed or had something go awry, but you ultimately took away a really good lesson from that moment? Is there like I know in IT we all have a million stories, but is there a time either personally or professionally that kind of sticks out in your mind?
For sure. I think especially earlier, my peers would probably also say now, but especially earlier in my career, I tend to have met the moment with a lot of gusto. I think probably coming in hot, especially coming into maybe a new space. Suddenly I'm like, these are all the ideas. These are all the things that are going to make our lives super easy. We just got to do them. We just got to do my list, and everything's gonna be for the better. But and I fell on my face more times than I can count because of that sort of approach. And what I've learned is, and this will probably be until the end of my career. Technology is easy, solutions are easy, but alignment is hard. Yeah. Like aligning with stakeholders, and aligning with vendors, aligning with expectations. Alignment is just that's the actual work. And especially as like my career has grown, my scope has grown, I'm no longer like in the weeds as much, but I'm finding myself having to align with more people than ever. Before I would, if when I was an IC, I would just have to sell an idea to my boss and get my boss's blessing. Now I have to sell an idea to my boss and other stakeholders in the business and finance and, depending on the project, security and legal and all these folks to move on a thing. And so I've found that working on the alignment piece, getting buy-in early and often will make my job easier to execute rather than and trying to get that up front, rather than trying to do that as I'm actually trying to execute. And that's, I think, where I used to be. I would try to execute and gain alignment at the same time. And what would happen is that would be a lot of whiplash for folks. They're experiencing change while also having someone tell you why this change is happening isn't a fun feeling. Even if they were coming with all the problems and I assumed I had all the solutions, but now more often I focus so much more on alignment before even hitting a button or having my team hit a button. So, yeah.
I feel this must be like a rite of passage as a IT executive, because I too have had that kind of whiplash or like times when I've rolled out a platform. I'm thinking of one time in particular, seemingly in excellence, where I'm like, oh my God, look what we've done. And then no one's using it. They're like, what the hell is this? I don't know how to do this, man. And my team will get on me nowadays because we'll start work with someone like a health system, and we'll have 28 different discovery meetings with stakeholders across the organization in operations and finance and this, all these different specialties. And I think I love that you just boiled it down into alignment, because that's really what it is. There was just a situation yesterday where I was talking to another health system, and they rolled out these kiosks, enterprise-wide, 450 locations.
Yeah.
And at some locations they use them, and at a bunch they don't. And like the workflows that the sites are using, nobody's even really clear on what there's a lack of alignment.
Yeah. Yeah. What are they supposed to be doing? Or why are we doing this? Do we agree to do this? Yeah. All of those things. And I think for me, I want to make sure I have that. So then my team doesn't have to then be the bad guy in executing change that no one knew about or whatever. And B, be able to then execute with autonomy. This has all been blessed. You don't have to go out and sell it. You just have to go and do your work. So yeah.
No, I love that. And then on the back end of that, what am I doing to implement proper governance and performance management, if you will, or create those feedback loops whereby I'm properly overseeing and ensuring that people are consuming things the way that we agreed to when we first aligned, right? Because time can pass over the course of an implementation, right?
Yep.
And that if there's something that's not working for whatever reason, that I've opened up the channels of communications to get
Yep.
that feedback.
Yep. 100%. And as you said, that's my job. And I think, and especially now, Lord knows, I'm sure you've had this, how many implementations you've done where the group of people you started with is completely different with the group of people you ended with, whether it's people getting new jobs or whether the scope has changed or whatever the case is. Yeah. And it's just making sure that's continuing is super important, especially as new players come in, and new players means new preferences or new requirements or new biases.
100%. I want to talk more about the work you guys are up to at Calendly. Before we do, I always just like to feather in a favorite book or literary piece, either that you're reading recently or all time. Your choice.
Great question. It's funny. My boss is going to feel like, if he ever sees this, like I'm pandering to him, but it really is one of my favorites. But I would say of all time, I think every IT leader should read Frank Slootman's Amp It Up. He worked at ServiceNow, like when Frank Slootman was there. And so he's a really big believer in that let's say the Frank Slootman methodology of working. But I think that's a really good book. And for any leader, I think if it's not in your repertoire, Radical Candor has always been a great for just how to manage. A lot of how I manage, how I work with folks is pulled straight from that book, copy paste. Like,
Love
I'm
it.
a big person. I'm like, let's not reinvent the wheel. If there's people who have spent millions of dollars or hundreds of hours studying, why should I think I'm going to do a better job? So I will copy and paste.
Hey, I'm a huge proponent. My wife always, it's funny when I'll talk about like subject matter experts, like bringing in subject matter experts, like to fix the car, do this, or this. I'm like, I have no idea. Let's bring in some subject matter experts. And it applies to everything. So you've been at Calendly for how long now?
Oh man, it will almost have been it's been like 10 months almost. So
Okay.
almost we'll round up and say almost a year.
So almost a year.
It feels like it's been both very fast. Like I remember just starting. Also, it feels it's been a journey in a good way.
Yeah. So let's talk about it. Tell me more about your vision for your group within Calendly, maybe some of the key things that you guys are working on, stuff like that?
For sure. Yeah, when I started, I think at that point, like IT was known, I think more so for like its service desk capabilities, which it happens. Like that's what people interact with day in, day out. But like in IT, there is way more than that. And so for me, it was a really big job to like market like ourselves. I once had a boss that said IT should be treated almost as a product. Like we have features and capabilities that we can deliver to a business. And so we need to like let people know that this is what's in your arsenal, leverage us, use us. And so that was a really big part of that early on journey. The gospel spread in a good way, and now I have a backlog that even if it was 2 years, I wouldn't be able to wrap up. But I would say a backlog, an organized backlog, is job security. For us right now, Calendly has been around for a bit, but like any startup, every department grew independently of each other, right? And a lot of our application stack, a classic case of we had a lot of redundancies. We have a lot of systems that don't necessarily talk to each other that should talk to each other. And so right now, my focus has been on a lot of the foundational pieces of how do we go from small, I wouldn't say a small startup, but just from a startup to an enterprise company where we have controls, where we have clear sources of truth, where we have clarity on what data we're looking at when. And a lot of that means reducing just the tech debt in our environment. And so that's been a lot of the focus. And with that, a lot of it has also been we moved fast because it was growth, but now it's how do we look at our environment and look at in partnership. We have a lovely security team and make sure that we've implemented a lot of the controls that you would expect in an enterprise environment. And how do we make sure that we're keeping up with foundational work? So right now it's been a lot of building from the ground up, resetting expectations, almost one could say going back to the drawing board in some spaces I've always said, if it's not working, let's not build on top of that. Let's roll it back. And even if we have to start from zero, start from scratch to build it in the way that we think is best. That's been the journey of Calendly from an IT standpoint right now has been just a lot of those foundational pieces.
Yeah, I love that. How big is Calendly, like from an employee count standpoint?
Yeah, we're about 650 FTEs. Yeah, for sure, for sure.
It's funny too, because I think Calendly, I think it's this calendaring app or like plugin, if you will. It's wild to think. But like what you talked about with the teams growing up in those silos, I totally get it and it makes sense. What other challenges are Calendly facing as an organization right now? So we're coming out of COVID. You guys are making a name. And I would argue that, or not argue, but in my mind, like when I look at Calendly, if I'm using Calendly instead of like my Outlook calendaring plugin that they rolled out, that I guarantee probably isn't as good as Calendly. Sorry, Microsoft.
No, I think we all know what a Microsoft bookings page looks like, and I think the aesthetically Calendly definitely has a leg up. I don't think anyone is going to disagree with that statement.
Or even Visio, I was complaining about on a call earlier. Anyway, but what are some of your biggest challenges as an organization today as you consolidate, as you scale? Like, what does that look like?
For sure. I think just in general in SaaS, COVID was just such a unexpected rocket ship. Like you tell who, unless I cannot imagine there was someone who predicted, man, when a global pandemic hits, valuations for SaaS companies and is going to just skyrocket. And so I think anyone in SaaS, it's like trying to figure out like, what is the new normal? Like it's long and established, like COVID, that was a blip for a lot of companies that thought that growth was going to sustain. It's no secret that didn't. And so I think for Calendly, it's just like any other SaaS company, it's figuring out like what does out of COVID even still, what does that new normal, that new long-term look like? And I think for right now for us, it's just we have I will quote my boss. We're like a PLG king, like how viral Calendly is. Calendly is the first. It's really the first company that I've ever worked for that literal strangers who I meet and they're like, "Oh yeah, I use you. Oh my gosh, I love you losing your links." And so it's like, how do we maintain that and sustain that sort of brand and that viralness of the tool? Like even my dad, because he's a high school chemistry teacher, and like his like counselors use Calendly to like book slots with students. That's like how prevalent Calendly is. And so yeah, I think it's just like how do we sustain that in this new normal post COVID will be really important. And I think a question that is yet to be answered. I think a lot of companies are trying to find their footing in 2024 and 2025 probably. And I think Calendly is no different.
Yeah. And I think about what do different like B2B partnerships look like, maybe with different applications that could benefit from like a calendaring function and then are selling to end customers, like almost some kind of motion like that.
For sure. And I think a lot of companies know like that sort of calendar link, whether it's bookings or Google, it's that first entry point a lot of times to the customer. And so like that in and of itself is so powerful. That's the interaction. That's what's going to get them through the door, and being able to maximize that and to have that always as the starting point, and like how do you carry that throughout like a customer journey, customer interaction is super important.
Yeah. And I think like when I'm helping to design another app right now, and one of the aspects of it is scheduling an appointment or a booking, and you guys have done such a great job in making it frictionless. I actually used Calendly last night going into today to book a meeting with a friend of mine who's currently in Morocco, and like 5 seconds, I like clicked the time and it populated my information because it was already saved on my cookies, and then it was done.
And that's honestly, for me, that's really the magic. It's that 5 seconds. It's I don't wanna sound dramatic, but it's almost like a dopamine hit of, "Oh, man, that was so easy." Like, I moved about my day. Yes, like, it got done. And there's a feeling of satisfaction when something is so efficient, so frictionless, especially for tech nerds, probably like yourself and myself, but also for people who usually dislike technology because they feel like they have to fumble with it. Calendly never feels like you have to fumble with it. And I that honestly has always been, and mind you, I've always been an admirer of Calendly from before I joined the company. A lot of it, to be honest, was because I really admired the CEO, his journey and as an immigrant, and how he was able to build Calendly from nothing. And there was like a lot of maybe not the same scope, but a lot of parallels between my dad and my mom also being immigrants and all what they were able to accomplish in such a short time. And so anyway, that's always just been a point. But for me, yeah, the secret sauce is like that frictionless experience and those for the end user. And that's honestly what I always want to give from an IT standpoint. I want to give folks a frictionless experience while ensuring all of my stakeholders from the control side, security side, compliance side, governance side are happy. But that's what we always want is like, how do I make things easy and frictionless for users?
Yeah, I love that. I just love the immigrant story. My wife immigrated to the US when she was 5. Her parents didn't speak the language at all. Had to learn English. Just hustle for like literally everything. And like
Hustle for
how
everything.
scary, it would be to do that. And as an entrepreneur, right? Like very familiar with totally different than like immigrating, but like just from a standpoint of your founder and it's a lot like starting something from nothing. And sometimes when I like watch Shark Tank, I'll tear up because I'm like, oh my God. Like it's like the quote from Politics Aside, man in the arena with like from Teddy Roosevelt. It's just, that's what it is
Yeah,
sometimes.
for sure, for sure. And yeah, I think Lord knows I could talk about this in itself for an hour, but there's just such a hustle culture. And I think that it really does. This is no secret because I remember I'd seen this interview, but the reason like why Calendly was free to begin with was because I think he ran out of funds like to build a billing within it. So, and that's what gave it that freemium model, but I don't think it was planned to begin with, but that's now what's made Calendly so prolific and like that viral brand and the brand equity that Calendly's been able to build really stellar. And honestly, it's just hustle. He hustled. And yeah, can learn a lot from that. It's just you got to keep trying to get to the next step,
Love it. So, couple last questions. One would be, we have every SaaS in the world now looking at like how they're integrating large language models within their platform. Gotta go there, right? So, what's on your guys' roadmap as it pertains to Gen AI? And I'm like, are they gonna do maybe like a workforce management angle, or I don't know. I'm just curious what's on the roadmap.
For sure. I think I'll talk to it more so from Lord knows. I think you can actually go, I think it's like calendly.com/ like AI or landing AI, something like that, where you can participate in like what they're calling the future of AI powered scheduling. But for me, on more so the corporate IT side, I've been trying to solve the mystery of how do we use AI to accelerate a lot of our internal tasks at Calendly. And if you're not looking at ways to at least experiment, investigate, see the potential of what AI can do in your like space, I think you're falling behind. Like you can't ignore that. So for me, it's right now, I think Calendly's at a scale where I've told my team, let's experiment, let's push the boundaries. If we fail fast and move on. But a great example is trying to use AI to ingest what tier 1 or tier 0 tickets look like, so we can just have that, I always say, spit out by the robot, have the robot spit that out. And for me, the angle that I've been taking is not everyone in a department or a team is going to have a technical resource. And so it's like, how do we leverage out of the box capabilities of a lot of these tools in the market to make it so we can empower folks to just have a sort of a guideline templates. They're like, okay, these are the guardrails. This is what I can do, and run with it, rather than having IT gatekeep or engineering. Because you know what, in order for me to do XYZ, I would need engineering talent to help train or fine tune or whatever the case is. It's like, how do we empower the business? If you're in marketing or in sales and you have a use case, you can just pick the ball up and run with it within these defined guidelines or training or whatever that IT has helped accelerate. That's how I've been trying to tackle it from an internal use case, because really the question is, how can we do it's always the question, how can we do more with less? Or how can we do more with what we've got? And yeah, right now that's been soup to shore for the last couple of months, is how can we get the robot to do it? And I think for IT specifically, it's a great use case around we all have repetitive tasks. I can't name I don't think there's any IT department in the world that doesn't have repetitive tasks that require some sort of analysis. So how do we leverage AI to do that? And that's been my focus.
Yeah, I forget. There was one CIO I had on, I think I had them on, who was talking about how, yeah, if you have a repetitive task, like something you're doing more than once, and you're not like using AI or automation to handle it, like you're doing something wrong.
For sure.
And I fall victim to that. There's not many companies I know of that are like there yet, unless they just have the resources of the Fortune 500. Even then, I won't name names, but there's a technology, hardware, software vendor, one of the biggest in the world, who we talked to recently about a very similar knowledge management use case, where they have people globally that are solving trouble tickets and so on, both internal and external. And oftentimes they'll find a like a golden nugget, like a best practice that they didn't even know was there. But then how are they disseminating that across, a global organization? There's just no good way of that happening right now. So like, how do you solve for that?
Knowledge management, it's funny you mention that because I feel like knowledge management has been top of mind for so many, ourselves included, but like even I think it was last week Atlassian had their like annual conference and they just came out with these huge, it's called Rovo. I think it's ROVO, and it's all about like knowledge management. Workato, we just recently got pitched this like knowledge management. It's funny. I think a lot of companies are having have a lot of similar pain points, have a lot of similar use cases. So it's now like, how do we capitalize on that? I'm sure is what a lot of folks are thinking about. But yeah, knowledge management has always been tricky because it's like knowledge management, content management, and it's all about ownership, and it goes back to the original piece of alignment of who owns what, who does what. I think let's just let the robot figure it out.
Basically, yeah. Oh, love it. So this has been awesome, Darlene. A couple, my final questions. One would be, where do you see things going in the SaaS industry in the future for Calendly specifically, or just in general? What do you think will be some of the biggest changes as time passes, with the understanding that you don't have a crystal ball, of course?
For sure. I think beyond this AI craze, I think it'll be interesting to see what steady state looks like, right? What it like, not that I'm necessarily like critical of a lot, but it's more I do think that there's a lot of smoke and mirrors in the market when it comes to folks like building a tool, and I'm like, "Oh, are you building something new, or is it literally just a nice UI over something that like OpenAI can deliver?" Or like that kind of stuff. But I think once the dust settles and we're like, okay, this is what we're consistently getting as results in leveraging this technology, I think a lot of lower level tasks will start to evaporate. Something that I've been thinking about recently, forget how it came to conversation, is that I'm just realizing that like more and more we're asking for, especially in IT, for like senior folks to do things because a lot of lower level tasks are being automated, whether it's through just whether it's as simple as like a Workato recipe or some sort of like RPA solution or AI. Like a lot of lower level tasks are going away and are no longer an issue. And it's like, how do we make sure that we're still building a pipeline of talent? Because I really don't remember how I got this, but I remember I cut my teeth as I started like at a help desk. That's how I learned how to interact with folks. That's how I learned like how to use my brain to troubleshoot. And suddenly we're asking more and more of like senior level talent, but it's like, how do we make sure that we have a place where people can become seniors in that growth path, and we're not just giving large tasks with large risks to people who may or maybe don't have that work experience to back it, that maybe a lot of what they've done is theoretical but not practical. And so that's something that I've been thinking about, and I think that'll be not necessarily a right now issue, but an issue maybe 5 to 10 years from now, is how do we make sure that we still have a steady state of talent that is going through the ranks? And it's not because I think you have to, people grow in different ways. It doesn't necessarily need to be up, but I do think that there's experience that you can just get by like doing something in a way that's low risk, because maybe your scope is smaller. So anyway, that's something I've been thinking about, is like talent in IT and how that's going to look like in 5 to 10 years.
Maybe you're just gonna have to stick them in a simulator of being in a help desk. They're just like answering the phone all day.
For sure. But yeah, we just did a rollout for a new tool that helps automate like our access requests. And we got rid of literally like 90% of the access requests. Like it equated to a month's worth of tickets in 6 weeks. So that's gone. That's something where someone would have gone into Okta to provision, to click here, do that. This is how groups relate to applications, so on and so forth. And now that's just robot. Like that's fully automated. That is now it's a centralized catalog. Someone clicks here, You get the approval and it'll automatically provision, set them in the right group, give them the right access, give them the right role, and then we call it a day. And there's actually no ticket handling on our end. It's a win for me because now I get to take that work and shift it into higher level work. But if I'm thinking about someone coming in and they're trying to figure out how do we provision folks, how do we do role-based access at Calendly, suddenly it becomes more theoretical and less practical for someone. So anyway, those are the things that sometimes clutter my head.
It's super interesting to think about, like, my daughters 1.5 and 3.5. If they were to go in technology, like, what would it look like?
Yeah,
I just have no idea.
no idea. And anyone who says they do is lying.
For sure. So last question, Darlene, would be if you could go back 5, 10, 15 years in time, what advice would you give your younger self?
Oh, great question. Man, I think like feeling settled. And I think this is more specific to me, but I have a lack of ability to feel settled like in a role. I'm always like looking for what else can I do? What else can we tackle? What other problem exists? And just allowing things to mature, to iterate, and giving yourself space and time for that is very important. So I probably would tell myself probably 5 years ago would have been a good time.
I think that's definitely relatable, especially for us people in IT that are on the carousel. I get it. This is awesome, Darlene. Thank you so much for being on today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. Enjoy.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in, and we will catch you all next week.